The information discussed on this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered investment, legal, or tax advice. Opinions expressed are those of the participants, are subject to change, and may not reflect the views of Laguna Capital Management. Any securities, investments, or strategies mentioned are not recommendations to buy or sell. Investing involves risk, including the possible loss of principal. Listeners should consult their financial professional before making any investment decisions. Laguna Capital Management is a registered investment advisor. Services are only offered in states where Laguna Capital Management is properly licensed or exempt from licensure.
You've all heard of a charity that helps other people, but how about one that also helps other charities? On this episode, we sat down with Ian Noyes, Central Coast and Bay Area Director of the National Christian Foundation. We learn about Ian's journey from lead pastor to charity executive, as well as what the National Christian Foundation is doing to help donors and charities give more generously.
Behind every thriving community are the leaders who make it happen. Join us as we meet the local influencers and visionaries shaping our community. This is Leaders with Laguna, with your host Jonathan Keith and Joshua Keith of Laguna Capital Management.
Welcome everyone to Leaders with Laguna. My name is Joshua Keith, and I am joined by my brother and fellow financial advisor, Jonathan Keith. Our firm, Laguna Capital, is excited to introduce you to and highlight different leaders in our community. We want to dive into their backgrounds, their work, and maybe touch on a couple of financial topics along the way. Today, we are thrilled, very excited to have with us Ian Noyes, the Area Director for National Christian Foundation, focusing specifically on the Central Coast here in California and the Bay Area. Ian brings over 2 decades of experience in pastoral and ministry experience to NCF and the team. And I would say personally, and I know I speak for my brother, it has been a pleasure getting to know Ian over the last couple of years and just watching him apply his giftings and talents to great things for God's kingdom within our community. So Ian, with all of that, welcome to Leaders with Laguna.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. It's good to be here.
John and I thought the place to begin is actually having you share with the listeners the path that led you to being a leader for NCF. You have a very servant-oriented, very cool background, planning churches, serving as lead pastor, among other things, before taking on the role that you have now as a leader within NCF. So would you talk a little bit about sort of your path to NCF, and then also maybe just as you look back on those experiences, just how they sort of benefit you now and sort of just gave you specific giftings and skills for the work that you're doing now for NCF?
Yeah. As you mentioned that, probably helpful to maybe talk a little bit about just what led me into ministry in the first place. Shortly after getting married, my wife and I lived in Berkeley, California, in the Bay Area. And we were doing campus ministry at UC Berkeley. Specifically, we helped to start a ministry to graduate and professional students. And functionally, what that looked like was kind of meeting with young adults who were in graduate programs and asking the question, how does following Jesus give you a new imagination for fill in the blank, whatever specific sector they were in, whether that was business and finance or city planning or art history or physics or whatever. How does following Jesus kind of help you engage that topic? What are the questions you're asking as a result of that? What are the hopes you have? So it was that question that kind of sent me to seminary, thinking that pastoring congregations was going to give me more and more opportunity to connect with people about these kinds of first things conversations. And went to the East Coast to grad school, and then kind of worked my way back west, pastoring different congregations. And in some ways, kind of found that a lot of pastoral ministry, well, it's also a lot of event planning and HR specializing and crisis management consulting. And honestly, those kind of core conversations about really how do you integrate faith into every aspect of your life was something that even the more successful I got in the kind of Christian church ministry space, almost like the less and less I got to talk about the stuff that really mattered the most to me. And so, interestingly, pivoting to the National Christian Foundation, these are the conversations I have all day long with families and individuals, thinking about how do they integrate their faith and work, how do they integrate their faith and finances, how do they just tell a bigger story with their lives and the resources that God has entrusted to them to steward well for his kingdom. So this is it's just been a joy to work for NCF now going on a little over 7 years, and just so appreciate the chance to step into these conversations with families and many of the ministries and charities that they most care about.
And so let's just go right into that. Could you talk a little bit about, for the listeners that don't know, could you talk just a little bit about what NCF is, its mission, and just the variety of services it provides, and also maybe just sort of what a typical day for Ian is like in your work with NCF?
Yeah. Well, NCF stands for the National Christian Foundation, and we are the largest Christian grant maker in the world. So last year alone, $3.2 billion was given to the National Christian Foundation, and we facilitated $2.6 billion in grants out to various nonprofit organizations. And in that, one of the things I just love about that, there's a technical side of what we do, which has to do with being a donor advised fund host, which is just simply a giving checking account, so to speak. It helps to facilitate and mobilize generosity, where people can put money into a particular account and get a deduction for that gift to the National Christian Foundation. But then it sits in a container, like a container on a container ship, that they then get to advise us where to grant it out. So we're never the end recipient of the grant, but we simply facilitate grants out to charity. So there's that technical piece. And then the other side of the technical work that we do is around giving assets. So for many people, the bulk of their wealth and net worth is actually in their assets, not in their cash. And yet so much of giving is simply out of cash. And so we help mobilize what often is that 90% of people's net worth and help them think creatively and develop an imagination for how that too could be deployed for God's kingdom. And in that process, a lot of technical tax efficiency that goes into that, and we help people think through how to turn what would be tax dollars into giving dollars. So there's a mobilizing resources side of the equation, and then there's a deploying resources side of the equation. And all along the way, we also are deeply invested in helping just deepen conversations around biblical generosity, supporting this larger ecosystem that's helping people live more generous lives, because we just believe that generosity is a pathway to live the bigger story that God has for us.
In the last few years, would you say that there's more of an appetite for sort of on behalf of donors for sort of what we'd call strategic, sort of thoughtful giving? Or would you say that in general, there's always been that appetite? I'm just curious if like the trends have moved that way, or if no, they've always been pretty strong.
Well, I mean, I think more and more people are aware of how using a donor advised fund to facilitate their giving can be a really effective tool. And it's effective for a lot of reasons. One is it just simplifies the process in a number of ways. When people give to a donor advised fund, they have flexibility of where they then grant it out. But what's nice is it really simplifies giving. So instead of making grants to 50 different organizations and keeping track of the receipts and sending them in a shoebox to your CPA, you just make one gift to your donor advised fund, have one receipt that you give to your CPA for your deduction, and then these funds are there and available for your granting. So not only will you get a thank you gift from your CPA, but you now have made the complex financial decisions around your giving, and now you just get to be responsive to where God is leading you to deploy those resources. So, I mean, the way it works out in my life is instead of sitting in that fundraising dinner and having to have the side conversation with my wife about, well, what if we make a gift, what will it do to our cash flow and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
I've already given the funds. I've already done the thinking around that, the strategic mobilizing of those resources in tax efficient ways. And now I get to just be responsive to, is this a call that God has on our life? Is this an invitation for us to support this ministry or that person? And then honestly, on my way from the dinner to the parking garage, I make the grant from our donor advised fund. Super simple. And so I think we are seeing an uptick in both people who are aware of that as a vehicle and a tool through which they can give. And then I think that I'm excited to see too, there's just a renewed interest, particularly among kind of the younger generation, around wanting to be involved in seeing good things happen in the world. And there's this giant wealth transfer that we all talk about in the nonprofit space. I'm sure you think about it in the wealth management space. And, that transfer is going to show up in one of three ways. It's going to go to heirs, it's going to go to taxes, or it's going to go to giving. And so we're excited to help that mobilize that for giving, both so people can enjoy it, the act and participate in that giving, not just wait until after they're gone, but also for the kingdom impact it has. So
it's interesting you mentioned that. Last week when we spoke with Margot Byrne, the CEO of the YMCA, she mentioned that as well, that she is noticing the use of strategic giving, let's just call it, for example, donor advice funds, that by younger people, that younger and younger people are more actively using those sort of special vehicles as opposed to just writing a check. And
Right.
that encourages her, just so.
yeah. And I think, you talk about special vehicles, I think they're more and more just becoming they're very effective vehicles. I mean, just, and I want to also be honest, like there's some controversy in this space too. Actually, 2 weeks ago, I was on Capitol Hill meeting with some of our state representatives about donor advised funds and just honestly educating some of our representatives and their aides and others around this topic. And one of the primary criticisms of donor advised funds is that they just are another way to sort of store wealth and not actually deploy resources to nonprofits. And so to that, I would just say that may be the case for some donor advised fund hosts, but as I mentioned at the very beginning, I mean, 3.2 billion in and 2.6
Right.
billion out. Like, we exist to mobilize resources to the nonprofit sector, and in some ways, putting them in donor advised funds makes them more available when there's a real need, like a disaster response. I mean, we had donors the day after the Eaton fire and Palisades fire made grants out of their donor advised funds just because they had already mobilize those resources, and they can be super responsive to needs. And so I actually think it's exactly the opposite, at least for us. And, we engage our donors pretty regularly on helping them kind of get involved. So
That's a great point. I could picture, I mean, on the side of the table that we sat on, I think we could substantiate this, but just the friction's been reduced. The friction up front to give to the donor advised fund, that might be comparable to giving to a charity. But once it's in the DAF, like you've said,
yeah,
it's much easier just to send it out.
Yeah.
I mean, at least experientially, it seems that way.
No, for sure. And for you guys too, I'm sure the other thing is it's easy to mobilize some of those basic strategies around like giving appreciated stock over giving
Exactly.
cash, which is just another way, I mean, increasingly we just call that swapping. Like you can just make a gift from your appreciated stock and then use your cash to buy the same stocks right back. And you got to step up in basis. And
Exactly.
when you do need those funds later on, you have less, you just have lowered your tax burden.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Switching gears a bit. So as you alluded to, we've said we're financial planners. And so we love this whole space of educating and bringing awareness to strategies, techniques like you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
How do you guys go about at NCF? How do you go about educating your partners, the stakeholders there, everything from the actual donor to maybe nonprofits that you work with?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I appreciate the question. I think there's something we're actually doing on both of those fronts. And these are new initiatives actually at NCF. I think for a long time, we had hoped that simply offering a donor advised fund and facilitating asset giving was enough. But I think we've found increasingly that we just want to do a better job of serving both the donors and the recipients, the grant recipients. And we sit in kind of a unique seat because we're an in between. And in part, we can kind of be Switzerland in those conversations too, which is nice. I'm not selling anything. I'm just serving and helping the flow back and forth. So two specific initiatives that we've done on the grant recipient side, the nonprofit side, we just noticed for a while that no matter how many times I had sort of like coffee or explained what NCF does, that it still sometimes just felt a little bit like a black, mysterious box. Describing donor advised funds and asset giving and tax efficiency. And you have a couple of those and unless they're uniquely interested or have some background or training, it's a lot of information to kind of capture. So we created something called Asset Giving University, or AGU, as a way to train and support and encourage. And we do it. The thrust of this is really around two things. It's not just tactical and strategic and helping people understand the power of asset giving and giving appreciated stock and these giving, qualified charitable distributions from an IRA or these kinds of things, which are legitimate and important strategies. But we also just felt like we have an opportunity to help shape the donor conversation where it's really aligning around what do we want for donors? not just what do we want from donors. How do we join them in their journey of generosity, recognizing that as a recipient of grants, that donor is giving to a variety of things. And one of the ways that we can actually differentiate ourselves as a nonprofit is by serving them rather than thinking about how they can serve us, and joining them in this ongoing larger story and journey that they are seeking to live a big life. And they're giving us one expression of that. And you, as the nonprofit receiving those grants, is a way that they're seeking to have an impact in the world. How do we come alongside them and serve them in that journey and be a guide and a help and just turn that language? I mean, I think most folks in development would say that they want to be in that seat, but then sometimes the practice is different. So how do we actually do that authentically, genuinely? So we train people in that regard, just asking open-ended questions, like, just listening, spending, the bulk of the meeting hearing their story rather than telling our story of why we're so important and worthy of the gift, et cetera. So I think that's one of the pieces. And then we do a lot of training around the technical side of here are the strategies, here are the 10 basic strategies that can lead to tax efficient giving for donors. And here's how to begin those conversations. So we do a lot of role playing in addition to just teaching to help them gain the skills. So we're just trying to help level up everyone's game when it comes to donor engagement.
That's great. And in case there's some people involved in nonprofits that are listening to this, what sort of wheelhouse would you say in terms of nonprofit size or sort of target types of nonprofits does NCF sort of partner with to do those sorts of things?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, a lot of times in those sort of small to medium-sized nonprofits, the executive director is also the lead fundraiser. And so,
right.
So you've got a lot of hats. So we built this for them too. So that kind
Perfect.
of like $3 to $10 million range where you don't have a dedicated specialist in fundraising. At the same time, we also have worked with some pretty large organizations that are, national, international, and have actually gotten so much out of the program that now they're reaching out to us and saying, can you train our whole team, our whole development team? So it can be that $3 to $10 million annual budget range, but up to, you name it, the size. And so we just really feel like there's a way, even for folks who are specialized in development and advancement or whatever their title is, that we can all think and learn more about what it means to engage donors meaningfully and bring real value to those conversations and be additive rather than just extractive in our engagement with donors. So that's just a big heartbeat for us.
Yeah, that's great. We talked about this a bit earlier in terms of trends, but if you don't mind taking a second and diving a little bit more into that in terms of, we talked a little bit about donor advised funds. Those have increased in popularity, I think it's safe to say, over the past few years. What other sorts of things, and feel free to get as technical and non-technical as you want. The other thing that you, in light of that, also with trends and the seat that you sit in, are you seeing different levels of engagement or rising engagement as we talk about generations, right? Younger generation versus older generation. I would imagine there's some potential dynamics going on there and also from an awareness perspective. So how does all that look from a trends perspective?
Yeah. In some ways, this kind of touches on, I filled out the nonprofit side, but this is about the donor engagement side. We have definitely seen a lot of people who are thinking, and this is, maybe the older generation is really starting to ask the question about like legacy questions. Like, what does this look like? How do I pass these resources on in a way that is going to empower my kids' lives versus ruin my kids' lives? And so we have, there's definitely a lot of interest in trying to make sure, or just asking that question, like really thinking intentionally about, I want this to be a blessing and not a burden. And yet sometimes, we get involved in these conversations where it's like the way that it's set up, it could be a burden. And so trying to think through that, like, how do you position this? So in that sense, we often will say, that our value proposition at NCF is that we want to walk alongside donors as they seek to wisely steward all that God has entrusted to them. And similarly, through a series of phone calls, coffees, lunches over years, the hope is that somehow that will happen.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think we thought, well, hey, what if we did something more intentional? because the truth is these are big questions and they are complicated questions and they have tails. They reverberate through a family. And so getting this right, and I think just wanting to be super thoughtful about how giving is done, but also how this generational wealth transfer happens, inheritance, financial finish lines, all that sort of stuff. We created something called Legacy Lab, which is a pretty intensive retreat format. And we've kind of boiled it down to a couple different modules to help really facilitate these dialogues, initially with either individuals or couples, to help them get clear about what it is that they would like to do. I mean, for years, I've made referrals to estate planning attorneys and others, and but sometimes the biggest challenge is just getting clear on what it is that you want to see happen in the world. What is it that you want this wealth to do in your life, in your family's life, for the issues and concerns that you carry, the burdens and passions that are on your heart. So Legacy Lab is broken out in different modules. The first module is around foundations. We talk about what are your kind of core beliefs, values, vision around money. We help people write a money manifesto. What is the role of this power in your life? What do you want it to do and achieve?
So to get more specific about that, what does that look like? Because this sounds like a fascinating process.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Is it entire family that's participating in this? Is it typically the legacy? I'm searching for the proper word, but the legacy generation. Generation one. Or does it involve 1 through 3?
Yeah.
How have you seen that be most effective? Maybe is the best way to ask that.
Well, our ultimate aim is if there are generations in play, we'd love to see it be a generational conversation. Okay. But you can't have that family conversation until there's unity with, a couple or an individual.
That's fair.
Yeah. So we start with an individual or a couple and help them get clear. What are their vision, missions, values, passions, burdens, et cetera? One of the modules is around marriage and money. So for couples, from your seat, I'm sure you see it. People have different views and perspectives and different upbringings. And so we try to just unpack the boxes, get all the stuff out on the table, figure out where the challenges, the growth, what I call growth areas are, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then this is a whole day. Like we spend a day with couples helping them get clarity about this. And then day 2 is around giving North Star. How do we help them identify those burdens and passions that they want to focus on? And what is their giving goal and plan? And then also just what is their current giving story? So, I'd led one of these recently with a couple and, their fund was growing $1 million a year, their donor advised fund.
Sure.
Just because of what it was invested in.
Right.
And their giving goal was significantly less than that. And which is fine, no judgment. But I just wanted to make sure that that had been a conscious decision.
Right. Like, at the very least, there's a discussion there that might be warranted.
Absolutely. Is this the story that you want to tell? And if it is, great. And if it isn't, then what would you need to do differently? And so really this is about this whole experience is kind of like a curiosity adventure and a discernment experience. Like we were trying to help them discern what it is that they're being invited into. What is God calling them to? How can they step into this bigger story? So that's module 1 is sort of foundations, giving North Star, and that's a 2-day experience. And then if they want, there's another module that's focused on heir preparedness. What is their current plan around heirs and inheritance? What are they excited about that plan? What are they concerned about that plan? And if they're excited or if they're concerned, would they tweak anything? Would they change anything? And we just kind of help them give shape to it. And that's module 2. I often will engage with generation 2 and kind of get their perspective.
That makes sense, yeah.
What knowledge do they have? Is there anything they wish their parents knew about them that they don't know? Or understood about them that they don't understand? Right. And just try to kind of be that safe space to help them
work through it
and have those conversations so that they again, are being conscious about the plan, intentional about the plan, and even more confident about the plan. And in that, we also help them think through what's their financial finish line. And then what is it, do they feel good about what they've set aside for themselves and for their ongoing needs? Just how do we help them kind of put those pieces back together? So part of that is a capstone. But then the last module is actually to take all that stuff and to, if they would like to, we facilitate a family giving summit where they get together with generation 2 or sometimes generation 3 and actually experience giving money away together because It can be a great way to build unity and connection and intimacy as a family. I led one of these recently, and we had 3 generations in the room making
That's neat.
decisions about where to grant money. And that day, they gave away a significant amount of resources, and they all got to celebrate. And
All feeling collective in
yeah,
the effort and in the nature of what they're doing. That's great.
absolutely. An 11-year-old and a 75-year-old making decisions together about where God's calling them to get engaged,
It's
and then
really neat.
deploying those resources and being able to celebrate and send those gifts out with prayer and blessing. And I mean, that's what we really love to see, is kind of move through that whole process and help. And again, ideas are great and helping teach, give people, spark their imagination, but ultimately what a lot of culture is built by just repeated action over time. And so part of what we're doing is just try to help families, couples, families build culture, build muscles.
That's a great way to say it. Yep.
And so that's kind of why we've engineered this experience and offer it to a variety of different families. So, yeah.
The other thing, Ian, we've talked about this offline. I would love for you to talk about, obviously, the initiative you just discussed, but you have another initiative that I know deals with housing. Different, but obviously under the same umbrella, but it's that one's equally neat to me. So I would love for you to just take a minute and talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I discovered when I stepped away from leading congregations to working for NCF is that deep down, I'm entrepreneurial. I just love,
That's good.
I love starting things, which is another way of saying that I probably frustrated most of the churches I led because I was always trying to start new things. But so, yeah, kind of just noticed a problem. And sometimes, you see problems in the world and you just feel like God is tapping on your heart and saying, this is one I want you to step into. So this is an issue that I just felt implicated in, that I felt like I need to be a part of the solution here. So a couple of years ago, I'd started an initiative with a friend called Redemptive Real Estate, which is just helping people think through how they can steward their real estate resources and assets in ways that bring blessing and flourishing to communities. But one of those things is around just housing access, equity, and affordability. And that's where I just felt this little tug in my heart. And then at the same time, I met somebody who had a similar tug. And so we decided to just kind of brainstorm around this. How could we help address housing affordability? And, part of this is just born out of the data that, 20 years ago and for many decades before that, the traditional wisdom was it took 4 times your salary to purchase a home. But in the last 20 years, we've seen a steady uptick. Salaries have increased, but the cost of housing has increased significantly more, has outpaced that income growth, salary growth. And so there's just this increasing gap. And so now in the national average is it takes 6 times your salary to buy a house.
And that's the national average.
That's the national average.
In the area that you serve.
Oh my goodness.
Even a little more than that.
Yeah. I mean, in Santa Barbara, it's 10x.
Yeah. I was gonna say add a 0.
Yeah.
It's 10x. And, that's not that, and yet in these places, there are needs, nonprofits, churches, et cetera, and and teachers, police officers, those wages are not nearly high enough to support the kind of promise and of homeownership. And homeownership still is one of the greatest wealth engines for the middle class. And so we would love to see that increase. So we started Sycamore Equity to try to address housing affordability. Initially in these high cost of living areas, but what's been ironic is it works everywhere. There is a gap between. So it's a sort of gap between incomes and cost of housing. So
that's sweet.
Yeah, I can share a little bit about how it works if that would be interesting to the audience. But
please do.
Oh yeah, please.
Because this is kind of another thing it highlights is kind of this. I think there's been kind of a historic divide between like philanthropy and charitable capital and then investment capital. And I think there's more fluidity there.
That's a great point though. There almost some people see them in tension, right, versus compatible and overlapping.
Yeah, I give or I invest. And these are sort of moving in these like opposite poles and directions. And I think there's an emerging understanding that this is maybe more of a continuum, that you can have charitable giving on the one hand and investing on the other hand, and you want that to do different things in the world. But there's also this space to do impact investing or charitable investing. Like there's more space there. And so what we're kind of doing is stepping into that space with Sycamore. So it's maybe easier just to tell a story. We recently helped a pastor who was serving a congregation in the Central Coast purchased a home, a starter home. And if you're listening to this in Iowa, this might be shocking, but a starter home in the Central Coast is 1.2 million, modest home. And the pastor and his wife had set aside, they'd been very responsible, set aside $100,000 to be able to purchase a home. But their salary could not support a $1.1 million mortgage, nor could most people in service industries. And so they could qualify, though, for a $600,000 mortgage. So that left about a $500,000 gap. And in the traditional sort of world, they were just out of luck. They were just going to be renters, right? But what we do is we come in and help them build that missing gap, that missing capital stack. And so we do that by educating the donor base of the church and saying, hey, you can either give to the church to a designated pastor housing assistance fund. You can make an investment from your donor advised fund balance that maybe you've filled it up and put some money in there, but you're not ready to grant it out yet. And rather than it just sitting in an ETF fund or some, at NCF, we have faith-driven investment pools. Rather than it just sitting there, maybe you could actually invest a portion of that balance in an asset-backed, prudent real estate investment in your pastor's home. And then you also can, there was another individual who gave from a long-term self-directed IRA. And so about 200,000 was given to the church by about 25 individuals for a pastor housing assistance fund. 4 or 5, I think, individuals gave from their donor advised funds to support this effort. And then one person gave $100,000 from their long-term their IRA. So we take those sources of capital, organizational, institutional capital from the church nonprofit itself, the donor advised fund investors, and the investor, we aggregate it in an LLC and then make that LLC makes an investment in the pastor's home. It's just long-term patient affinity capital, and it liquidates upon refi or sale. And then the pathways in just get reversed. And the church gets their money back plus appreciation. So now they have the same buying power for pastor next. The donor advised fund holders get it back plus appreciation to re-grant, to redeploy for the next pastor, to re-grant to something else, to whatever they want to do with it. And the investor gets their money back as well for their IRA with, we target 3 to 9% returns. So this is...
That's great.
Yeah.
I love the logistics in that. And just to clarify, because we've talked about DAFs, the DAF in this case, and this is a little bit technical, but the DAF is not making a donation, a gift. It is just, it's another investment inside of the of that person's donor advised fund. Is that correct?
Yeah. So donor advised funds can be invested in that charitable space. And so those monies can grow tax-free too, typically. And so this is an alternative investment. Technically, this is a grant from their donor advised fund hosts at, NCF, Schwab, wherever, to a companion organization, nonprofit that we've set up called Sycamore Foundation. So it's a grant from a DAF to Sycamore Foundation.
Sure.
And Sycamore Foundation's charitable purpose is to address housing affordability.
Sure.
So then that Sycamore Foundation technically makes the investment in the property.
Got it.
Or in the LLC that invests in the property. And then it just goes, the pathway just gets reversed. Some of this is just creating these pathways.
Sure.
And a lot of times, that's the seat that NCF that I'm in a lot is just, what is the donor intent, both for mobilizing or for deploying? And then how can we create the best and most efficient pathway, an IRS compliant pathway?
Sure. Of course. Of course.
to make sure that we, understand the rules and live well within those boundaries. All this is completely above board and legal, and we make great pains to make sure that the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, so that these are legitimate pathways.
Sweet. Thanks for diving into all that. That's great.
Yeah, for sure.
Ian, we always want to end our conversations with the same question to our guest, and that is, please share with us something that you are grateful for today, either personally or professionally.
Oh gosh, there's just so much that I am grateful for. I love my work for sure. I hang out with joyful, generous people, and my job is to help them be more joyful and generous. Like, who does not want that job?
That is pretty good.
Yeah, I love my work, and I also am just deeply grateful for my family and for just the journeys that they're on. I'm just watching my kids, two in college and one out of college, and just getting to step into some really exciting adventures themselves, and have deep faith and trust in the Lord, and that's just been delightful to watch and see. And my wife too is just in her own kind of growing journey too. Just has started a graduate program in spiritual formation, direction, and soul care, and super excited to see what that leads for her. So I'm in a really sweet season.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm really thankful.
Thank you for sharing that. This, I know I speak for John. This has been great, a delight. So we really appreciate you taking the time. The NCF is very, very lucky to have you. Your heart to do all that you can to expand God's kingdom, and just working with people that feel the same way, facilitating just their display of benevolence. So yeah, bless you for your work.
Well, thanks. You guys too. It's so nice to work with advisors for whom this is a significant, value, to sort of discover you and to continue to deepen our relationship. It's been super fun. So thanks for the invitation.
Of course, of course. I will just point out, if listeners want to learn more about NCF and the solutions they provide, the work they do, they can visit www.ncfgiving.com, ncfgiving.com. Again, thank you, Ian, and bless you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, guys.